I mean, the gut is just part of our bodies. We shouldn't be ashamed of it. We should talk about how to optimize our pooping, about our eating. It's like it's all just all part of it.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. Today's show is full of crap. We're talking about poop maxing and poop positivity. It's this new trend on TikTok in which a lot of young people are talking about their bowel movements. So we are speaking with a gastroenterologist about why this trend is happening and how we should actually be pooping, what it should look like. That's a lot of poop. Also, we're taking a road trip with senior national political reporter Jonathan Allen, who is crossing the country in some unexpected places, talking to voters and what matters to them most ahead of the midterm November elections. Up first, though, President Trump's son-in-law and special envoy Jared Kushner met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today, trying to get him on board with a Gaza peace plan. A few weeks ago, Netanyahu rejected a plan drawn up by the Trump administration's Board of Peace. He said Israel would not withdraw from Gaza until Hamas is disarmed. Now, separately, Israeli settlers have trapped multiple Palestinian families inside of their homes in the West Bank for over a week now, cutting off water and electricity. U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee has called the settlers, quote unquote, Israeli terrorists. But the Israeli military has done nothing to stop them. So how far is the U.S. willing to go to put pressure on Israel right now? For this, I want to bring in NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley. Hi, Matt.
Hey, Yasmin.
So I mentioned Jared Kushner met with Prime Minister Netanyahu earlier today. Ambassador Mike Huckabee and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who is also a part of the Board of Peace, were in that meeting as well. What do we know that came out of this meeting?
Well, so far we have from the official statements that we got from a senior Israeli official basically saying that Kushner agreed that there needs to be Hamas's complete disarmament before any rebuilding or anything happens in the Gaza Strip. So it looks like we've gone the full swing of the pendulum from President Trump really selling out Netanyahu on this and saying, we made a deal with Hamas and Hamas is going to disarm. Netanyahu very, very delicately and carefully rejected that, which was noteworthy in itself that he would go against the U.S. president. And then now it looks as though Netanyahu is kind of back on board, and so is Kushner, and they're both saying really the same kind of language that brought us here to begin with.
Meanwhile, Kushner met on Sunday with leaders from Hamas. Did he go to that meeting with the intention of then taking what they had to say to Prime Minister Netanyahu? And what does it even say that Jared Kushner met with Hamas leaders about the way in which the Trump administration is viewing Hamas?
So you're right to say that this would be a pretty big deal. And it was a big deal that Khalil al-Hayya, the newly minted head of Hamas, met with Jared Kushner, who is officially the president's son-in-law. So, that was a big deal. But then what was Jared Kushner doing in this meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu? Well, I think you're right to presume that what we're seeing here, hopefully for the sake of the whole region, is a bit of shuttle diplomacy. That Jared Kushner met with Hamas, took that message to Benjamin Netanyahu, met with the Egyptians. We know that he met with the Egyptian president as well while he was there. And maybe that means that something is going to be moving forward. But right now, one of the things that we were hearing from this Israeli senior official who gave us this message was that, and we've been hearing this from the Israelis as well, the Israelis do not believe that Hamas is ever going to disarm, no matter how many times Jared Kushner or Donald Trump says that they did or announces that they do.
So we are back to, it seems, square one. That's happening. Then you have the situation in the West Bank. And you reported on Israeli settlers who have been harassing several Palestinian families there. Give us the latest on what we know.
Well, it's now been more than a week since this sort of blockade started. We can say it's been more than a week. It's really been several months that this particular hilltop that I visited last week, that has been the focus of settler attacks and harassment. Presumably these settlers, who we did not get the chance to speak to, they don't really speak to the media, they were coming from some of these sort of wildcat settlements that are illegal even under Israeli law that exist around the area of Kusra. But as it stands right now, it looks as though the situation is very similar to what we had last week, where the Palestinians are still being barricaded into their homes. They have no access to food and water except that which is brought by activists, which the activists then, and again, this happened today, have to hand this over to the military or the police, and then the military and the police have to hand that over to them. One of the really interesting things that you see when you go there is that the Palestinians who are there, they do not trust the police and the military at all because they see them as siding with the settlers.
The Israeli police could end this situation within an hour if they dealt with it the same way they deal with Palestinians, but they do not want to. This only allows the violence, the damage, and the harm to continue and escalate.
And there was these images where we saw them snacking with the settlers and praying with the settlers, and that, of course, makes them look quite biased, like they really are.
The Israeli
working on
police.
Working on behalf of the settlers. But at the same time, one of the things that was expressed to me by the Palestinians there was that they're terrified if the police leave. Because even if the police are totally on the side of the settlers, that is the only legal recourse that the Palestinian families who are trapped on the top of this hill that they enjoy. They need the police. They need the military, because without them, the settlers could just have their way with them. And that would be a disaster.
So then how much pressure do you think the United States is actually willing to put on Israel, not just when it comes to Gaza, but also with what's happening with these Israeli settlers? It is kind of a big deal that Mike Huckabee called these Israeli settlers Israeli terrorists, considering where he stands on Israel overall. But, I mean, are they willing to put any pressure on Israel?
We're talking about the capricious whims of the White House and the president. And it's impossible to know, because if Jared Kushner came up with some sort of major deal, or Netanyahu, and extracted some capitulation from Netanyahu or a capitulation from Hamas, President Trump could wake up and do something totally different. The president
But that issue is different also than the settler issue, right? And I'm wondering if the United States sees these two as separate or as one.
I mean, I think that the previous administration, the Biden administration, which laid sanctions on some of these settlers by name, they see them as all part of the same thing. But for the Trump administration, it's hard to know. You mentioned the ambassador, Mike Huckabee. He's made some comments in the past that didn't jive with the president's perspective or his agenda. September of 2025, for example, Mike Huckabee said basically that it would be a sovereign decision of Israel to decide to annex or not the West Bank. So for many, this came off as the U.S. ambassador to Israel blessing Israel's decision to potentially annex the West Bank. Well, that was not consistent with President Trump's policy. President Trump had been trying, and is still trying, to create the Abraham Accords with Saudi Arabia, who would dump the whole thing if there was annexation by Netanyahu of the West Bank. And they've been very public about that. So that would be a disaster for Trump's ambitions with the Abraham Accords. So we've seen several occasions, and this was just one of them, where U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, really spoke his mind, inconsistent with administration policy, and the administration either didn't support it or subtly or not so subtly came out and said, that's not how this is going to go. That's not what we think.
Matt Bradley, thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin.
So this week on the show, we're going to do something extra special. We are going on a road trip, not literally, but figuratively, via our correspondent. So it is part of a new NBC News series that we are calling Drive to Decision Day. It is this 6-day, 1,700-mile road trip along Interstate 80, where our senior national political reporter, Jonathan Allen, is visiting some of the most competitive districts ahead of the midterm elections, talking to the people who are going to decide control of Congress come November. John is going to be joining us with a dispatch from the road every day this week, and he is starting in New Jersey. Hi, John.
Hi, Yasmin.
So tell us about this trip, this project. Why I-80? Why a road trip? And why'd you start in New Jersey?
Okay, so we absolutely 100% wanted to get a good sampling of the most competitive House districts in the country. And I looked at a map maybe a month or two ago and started looking at where are they and what makes most sense and how can we get a chance to get out there and really talk to people and not just fly in and fly out. And what I noticed was that if you went along I-80 between New Jersey and Omaha, Nebraska, you would hit a bunch of them. And we're gonna go to 7 toss-ups out of the 18 in the country that the Cook Political Report ranks as pure toss-up. So we're going to do that. We're going to, and I say we because it's not just me. We've got a producer, Frank Thorpe. We've got our digital docs guy, Marshall Crook, in a minivan. We're calling it the E Street Cruiser. There may be some damage done, in terms of snacks eaten and things like that. But we're going to go through New Jersey's 7th district, which is today, then Pennsylvania 7 and Pennsylvania 8, Ohio 7, Ohio 9, Iowa 1, Iowa 3. We're going to stop at the Iowa State Fair. We're going to end up in Omaha, Nebraska, and Nebraska 2. And the whole idea here is to talk to voters. Why did we start in New Jersey? I know you asked. Yeah. I'm going to do this real quick. Tom Kean Jr. missed 4 months in Congress. Nobody knew where he was. He came back and said he had been getting treatment for mental health issues. And we wanted to test whether Republicans in this district, he's a Republican, were going to find that alarming. And so we went to Roxbury Township, which is a little bit more Republican than the rest of the 7th district, but we wanted to see how Republicans felt about his decision there and generally about inflation, the Iran war, some of the things that voters in the rest of the country are upset about.
You went to Roxbury Diner to do most of your interviewing?
We did. We went to the Roxbury.
What is the diner like?
The diner's amazing. First of all, as like any really good diner, an endless menu. Frank had the chili. I had chocolate chip pancakes and 2 scrambled eggs. It was fantastic. But the owners, these brothers whose father owned the place, were amazingly gracious. They helped us find people to talk to. They let us, work in their parking lot. They let us work inside. We talked to a big birthday party of Harley Davidson. There's like a Harley Davidson rider and his group of Harley riders. So we're talking about to people in congressional districts across the country about the upcoming midterm elections. Oh, God. You've got a very intense table here. And they were celebrating his birthday, and they're mixed politically, and they had like a little debate in front of us about politics.
We have an health plan out. Got a lot of people covered. May not have been perfect, but we got people covered.
And then we went to Cliff's Ice Cream Place, and that was pretty neat. And we went to an outdoorsman store and a liquor store. I heard a couple different things about Kean today. Number one, there were Republicans who said they are Republicans. They wear a Republican red jersey, and they will vote for Tom Kean come midterms.
I'm glad he went to get help. I think if you have a problem, then it should be addressed.
Does it affect whether you would vote for him or not?
No, because I want to see what he does.
We heard from one Democrat who said that that they're voting for the Democratic candidate against him, Rebecca Bennett. And then we talked to somebody actually just now, right before we got on the air, a Republican who said they were disturbed by Kean lacking transparency. That the fact that he didn't say what was going on with him for so long as he didn't vote on the House floor really bugged them. And I said, well, does that mean you're going to vote for him reluctantly? Does it mean you're not going to vote for him, or does it mean you're going to vote for the Democrat? And they said that they're not voting for the Democrat. It's a question between a reluctant vote for Kean or maybe not voting at all. She said her husband feels the same way, so 2 votes in play there. But I think the basic takeaway here is that if Tom Kean loses, it will not be primarily about his absence from Congress, but rather about the issues that are motivating voters across the country to show up and vote or to stay home.
Yeah, so in fact, Democrat could feasibly win if people just stay home instead of voting for the Democrat. What were the issues that you heard about most?
So immigration on both sides. There was a proposed ICE detention center here that has, at least for the time being, been frozen. It's not going to be an ICE detention center. So we've heard from people who are pleased with the president's efforts on immigration, which that he was deporting more faster, and also people who are terrified and angry about the deportation. That was on the Democratic side. We heard about it.
I do have to say, within our own community as Latinos, a lot of people did vote for Trump. Now they're coming back as November elections are coming, and just kind of he's been attacking our own people. And I think they're against what he's doing now.
People are talking about the Iran war. They're talking about inflation. The sense that I got from the folks that we talked to, at least some of them, was there's some disappointment that the president has not been able to rein in inflation. There is some disappointment that the Iran war is hanging on. But as one carpenter told us, he basically said that it's worth the sacrifice, that yes, it costs more money at the pump, but he believes in the mission and he believes in the president. And the sacrifice, as the president put it, that Americans are being asked to make is worthwhile, according to this voter.
It's been 40 some years, same thing over and over and over again. So, I think he's doing the right thing.
John Allen, I look forward to talking to you tomorrow. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jazz.
So there's a new way to identify yourself that all the cool kids are using, and it's based on what type of bowel movements you make. It's all part of this growing trend of poop positivity and poop maxing within the wellness world.
Okay, you guys, we are fiber poop maxing, so let's get this dookie started.
I'm a poop maxer, and this is my secret poop maxing salad. It is time for poop maxing. How can you poop more efficiently, poop better, and have a better time on the toilet?
For this, I want to bring in Dr. Trisha Pasricha, a gastroenterologist at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston, and the author of the best-titled book, You've Been Pooping All Wrong, How to Make Your Bowel Movements a Joy. Dr. Pasricha, welcome.
What a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It is great to have you. Listen, I love a good poop conversation. I am all about it. Can you first talk to me about this trend of poop positivity and why it's taken off?
Yeah, there's just been this trend to be more open and talk about parts of our body. And I think there's a couple of different reasons for that. One is GI disorders are incredibly common. They became more common after COVID. But then also, I really think that Gen Z, this is my own theory, like Gen Z is more open about their own bodies and about mental health and about gut health than I think a lot of people, myself being a millennial, ever felt comfortable with. And it's like really opening the door for all of us to have these conversations more publicly. Because at the end of the day, as a gastroenterologist, I mean, the gut is just part of our bodies. We shouldn't be ashamed of it. We should talk about how to optimize our pooping, about our eating. It's like it's all part of it.
So the book is actually behind you for those that are listening. She's obviously sitting in her office. Behind her, she has this book that is titled, You Have Been Pooping All Wrong. So what have we been doing wrong?
Well, the first thing we've been doing wrong, which you hinted at, is that we haven't been talking about it. And not talking about it has consequences. But then also, there's just the dynamics about what we're doing, the ergodynamics. We are not designed the way our modern life and our modern toilet seats, that's not designed for a healthy, safe bowel movement. And I'll give you a couple examples. One is that the way we eat now is obviously very different from how our grandparents and even ancestors used to eat. 60% of our diet is coming from ultra-processed foods, and it impacts our gut microbiota, which then impacts our gut health, certainly impacts how we're having a bowel movement. So that's one big part of the conversation is diet. Second, the way we're sitting. Think about our toilet seats. They're very similarly designed, right, to how we're sitting right now. We're sitting on a seat. Our knees are just kind of at this 90-degree angle from our waist. That's not how we're supposed to poop. Our bodies are not designed that way. And the reason is that if you think about your colon, you've got this long tube that leads down to the exit hatch. What people don't appreciate is
exit hatch?
Yeah. For lack of, but you have this muscle that goes around the end of that tube called the puborectalis muscle. And that muscle, it's like your body stepping on its own hose. It kind of kinks it off. And that's the position your colon is in when you're sitting, like you and I are right now, which is great.
Sit?
Well, you should squat. That's physiologically the way to straighten out that tube. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want to do that. I don't enjoy squatting over a hole. What I'd rather do is just lift my knees up with a stool or a stack of books or a book. So as long as your knees are above your waist, you don't actually have to squat over a hole. And then of course the third part of what we're doing wrong, and this is my short list, is that we're bringing our smartphones into the bathroom. People are spending 40 minutes deep into some season finale of The Pit or whatever your favorite show is, and you really should be in and out in under 5 minutes.
So I know that with this kind of poop maxing and poop positivity, they've been using this Bristol stool chart. It starts with type 1, which is separate hard lumps like nuts. And then goes all the way to type 7, which is described as liquid consistency with no solid pieces, which honestly sounds a heck of a lot like diarrhea and looks kind of yellowy. in this scale of 1 to 7, where should you be when it comes to kind of your daily pooping?
Yeah. Okay. So this is what might surprise people. I obviously spend more time than the average person thinking about this, and everybody thinks that the answer to that is a Bristol 4. Now, to picture that, the Bristol 4, it's the center of that chart.
It's like a snake.
It's this nice, smooth sausage. That's fine. People love a Bristol 4 because it's like a wipeless wonder. It's very pleasant. It's done. You move on with your life quickly. Great. If that's who you are, I'm proud of you. But I don't think people should actually get as hung up on the number as I feel like social media has made people believe now, because in my world, there's more than one thing that will contribute to what that shape is at the end of the day. And some of it is like good. Like if you eat more fiber and you're reaching your fiber maxing, you're reaching those goals, you're going to have a fluffier, softer stool. It might not be a 4 anymore, but that's actually good for you. So as long as you're not on those extremes, you're not like, feeling like you have to take a bath afterwards, but you're also not straining these little pebbles, I think you can be okay as long as other aspects of your life are coming together. The more important number to focus on for me is truly, how many minutes did I spend to get this out? And if it's more than 5 minutes, it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but it's a perfect Bristol 4, we still have a problem.
There is literally nobody I have ever spoken to about poop who talks about poop in such a lovely way as you do.
Thank you. What an honor. I appreciate this.
Dr. Pasricha, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right. That's going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. And if you like what you saw and you heard, press the subscribe button. We'll see you tomorrow.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.